He used to silence dissenters. Now he's the one on trial. The room fell silent as Karoline Leavitt gripped the edge of the witness stand. Her eyes, resolute and unwavering, met Judge Hargrove's. He wasn't just on trial, his entire legacy was. The air in the courtroom was thick, charged with the weight of history. Outside, a sea of protesters chanted, their voices rising and falling like a tide. Justice for the silenced. No more lies. Inside, the press swarmed like vultures, their cameras flashing in the dim glow of the courtroom's overhead lights. The scent of old wood and ink clung to the air, mingling with the clink of steel gavels and the rustle of legal documents. This was no ordinary proceeding. This was a reckoning. Karoline had spent years fighting the machine. A former state legislator turned activist, she had once been a name whispered in backrooms, a thorn in the side of men who thrived on quieting opposition. But now, standing under the gavel's shadow, she was no longer the underdog. She was the lightning. The case before the court was a single searing question. Had Pope Francis, the powerful and untouchable former governor of California, orchestrated a campaign of political targeting against religious minorities under the guise of national security? The answer, Karoline argued, was not only yes, but it was documented, undeniable, and etched into the marrow of the nation's conscience. The prosecution's case had built slowly, like a fire spreading through dry brush. A leaked executive order signed in the dead of night had authorized the indefinite detention of individuals suspected of subversive religious activity. A list of names, mostly Muslim, Christian, and indigenous leaders, had surfaced, linked to covert surveillance operations funded by a secretive trust tied to Pope Francis's old political allies. But it was the evidence that would break the man. A recording buried in the archives of a defunct lobbying firm that had been unearthed by Karoline's team. The tape was short, no more than 3 minutes, but it was enough to shatter the illusion of legitimacy. "We need to make sure the message is clear," a voice said, low and clipped. "These groups are a threat, not just to the state but to the soul of this country. If we act now, we can eliminate the problem before it grows." The voice, distorted but unmistakable, belonged to Pope Francis himself. Karoline had played the recording for the jury just hours before. The room had turned to ice. The judge's hand had trembled as he tapped his gavel. The defense attorney, a man with the smooth demeanor of a seasoned tactician, had stood and whispered, "This is a fabrication. A witch hunt." But Karoline had seen the cracks in his facade. She had watched him shift in his seat, his eyes darting to the podium where the tape had been played. He was unraveling, but the tape was only the beginning. Now the courtroom braced for the next blow. The testimony of Reverend Elijah Thorne, a man whose life had been turned upside down by Pope Francis's policies. Thorne had led a small Christian congregation in Los Angeles for decades, preaching peace and justice. Then in 2021, his church had been raided by federal agents under the new security laws. His sermons, his congregants, even his personal letters had been scrutinized. One of his parishioners, a young woman named Maria Reyes, had been arrested for inciting unrest after distributing pamphlets about the right to worshiping freely. Thorne took the stand with the solemnity of a man carrying the weight of 1,000 silent prayers. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled as he spoke. "We were never a threat," he said, his voice breaking. "We were just people who wanted to pray, to love, to live without fear. But when the law is used as a weapon, it doesn't matter what you believe. It only matters who you are." The courtroom fell silent. The jury leaned forward. Karoline watched Pope Francis from across the room, his face a mask of stoicism, but his jaw was tight, his eyes flinty. He had played the part of the statesman for years, the visionary leader who could calm the storms of politics. But now, as Thorne spoke of arrests, of families torn apart, of children waking to the sound of helicopters and sirens, the mask was cracking. Then came the second witness, Leila Chen, a cybersecurity expert whose work had exposed the surveillance network Pope Francis had authorized. She had leaked the data to Karoline's team after being offered a choice. Cooperate or disappear. Leila's testimony was clinical precise. She had accessed the files through a backdoor in the state's database, a flaw she had discovered during an audit. What she found was a labyrinth of names, dates, and encoded directives. The surveillance had been relentless. Religious leaders, activists, even journalists, anyone who dared challenge the status quo had been marked, monitored, and in some cases removed from the public eye. "This wasn't just about tracking," Leila said, her voice flat but laced with fury. "It was about control. They wanted to make sure no one could rise without their permission. No one could speak without their approval, and if you did, well, the state would take care of you." The courtroom erupted. The defense attorney shot to his feet, his voice sharp with outrage. "This is a lie, a smear campaign designed to undermine the integrity of our judiciary." But Karoline had already moved. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the din like a blade. "You say it's a lie, but you can't deny the truth in the faces of those who suffered. You can't deny the records, the testimonies, the evidence. You want to call this a smear campaign? Or are you just afraid of what it means for your legacy, for your power? Her words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Pope Francis's face was unreadable, but his hands had clenched into fists at his sides. Then Karoline turned to the jury, her voice soft but unyielding. This trial is not about a man. It's about a system that has allowed corruption to fester in the shadows. A system that has used fear, silence, and lies to maintain its grip on power. You have the power to make this right, to show that no one, not even the most powerful, is above the law. The room was electric. The judge's gavel struck and the jury was dismissed. Outside, the protesters roared with a new kind of hope, but Karoline knew the battle wasn't over. As she stepped out of the courthouse, the sun breaking through the clouds, she paused. Her eyes fell to the cross that hung on the wall of the courtroom, a symbol once used to justify the very oppression she had fought against. Now it stood as a reminder of what was at stake. This trial wasn't the end, it was the warning.